So if you've got, you start talking to a buyer at Walmart, you get excited, you fly, have your webinar, your calls with the buyer, and you get the order, and it's great. They like your product, but are you really prepared to satisfy their requirements? And they don't talk about that a lot, but there are a lot of strict requirements, and you can actually get penalized. If you don't label your products right, there's a dirty word in fulfillment called chargebacks. So if you don't have those labels correct, and you don't have the proper barcodes on everything, then you're going to actually have fines that can just completely obliterate your profits.
Welcome to the Better Batch podcast, where batch process manufacturers learn from industry experts. I'm Peter Suttard.
And I'm Alex Kovas. We're joined today by Brian Sweat. Brian leads Acctivate, who is a sister company of Mar-Kov and a technology provider to industrial manufacturers, much like Mar-Kov. Brian, so happy to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's good to be here. Just really happy to be, introduced to Mar-Kov, and we've been building software primarily for small to mid-sized companies, and our laser focus is finding companies that are using QuickBooks, whether it's QuickBooks Desktop or online, and have outgrown the inventory and order fulfillment and process manufacturing capabilities in QuickBooks, which are very, very limited. So that's been our laser focus. We've been doing it for over 20 years and have a lot of experience, more on the distribution side than the manufacturing side. So it's a really good matchup, meeting Alex and Peter, meeting you guys, and learning a lot more about quality and production scheduling and things that we've just not done as much in the past. But we do have a lot of focus on inventory and costing and the transactions that are needed by these companies.
Man, we're going to nerd out on that.
It's going to be great.
I'm excited. Yeah.
Let's start with inventory. What is it if you are a manufacturer? What are the things you're starting to see where maybe QuickBooks isn't enough? If you're looking around your facility and you're saying, okay, now we're really starting to struggle and we need to go the next step up. What are these people seeing?
Yeah, the number one thing is the lists that are available in QuickBooks. So when you think about your bill of materials, your finished goods, your raw materials, your components, QuickBooks is really designed for companies who are selling widgets, who have, they're just buying and selling products. So just basic distribution companies. And as everyone knows, we really, really focus on food and beverage companies and complex manufacturing that just does not exist in QuickBooks. Even their quote unquote enterprise software edition is very, very basic and limited. So our customers generally have hundreds or thousands of products and parts, and they mix them together and they assemble items together in a way that QuickBooks just breaks down. And the number one thing is QuickBooks is actually built for accounting, but when you start, having different lot numbers and things like that, it all gets mixed in together, and so your cost of goods sold when you finally sell the product is really averaged out, and it's not very accurate. So we just do a lot. It's companies that have outgrown the limits of QuickBooks, but also need accurate costing and profitability.
And so what would be some of the hardship or consequence of inaccurate inventory for a manufacturer? Because people might not realize they're suffering, right? In what ways are they suffering that then gets relieved as we come in and solve that?
Yeah, the best example is most of our companies that start with Acctivate, when we get brought in to help them and find a solution for them, is finding that they have negative inventory. So they'll have, they've oversold. There's absolutely no control, and there's no lot number control. Even with enterprise, you can add a lot number field, for example, but it's just a reference field. So you can type in anything you want. And so somebody selling it can enter lot number 123, and that lot number doesn't even exist in the system. So, I think just the mess that we find in QuickBooks when they start, if you look at your inventory list and you see a lot of inaccurate quantities, that's probably because you don't have any good controls in place. The other thing is that a lot of our companies, when you're using QuickBooks for accounting and you realize that your entire inventory is in an Excel spreadsheet, that's a big problem, right?
Yeah.
So that they're disconnected, and there's no connection between accounting and your inventory because it's in an Excel file that's on Bob's desktop.
Well, and something we often see is that whether they're trying to keep inventory still in QuickBooks or it's in Excel, it's not right. And so people like the purchasing person or the production person are just forever going out and recounting things, right? Like why does the purchaser have a forklift license? Why do they need to go out? Like, shouldn't they be able to look it up?
Yeah.
It feels like a nightmare. So as you guys come in, I guess frame the question two ways, like what can people do to best use a system and get accurate inventory, know where things are and have confidence that it's right? And how do they take the training wheels off, right? Like, okay, now I've got, system in to track everything. At what point do I begin to trust it and stop recounting everything all the time and actually say like, okay, yeah, I believe in the system and it works?
So as I said, when we start with a company, it's a mess. So it's not day one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you implement and you find accounting software and then you find your inventory and your distribution software and maybe that does the manufacturing or it's another product, when you put these systems together, you can't wait until you have perfect data to begin using that software. Mm-hmm. So you're right. It could be 60 to 90 days. It could be 6 months based on the size and scale of your company. But starting to use those tools and have the picking, for example, like when we pick orders, we actually have like mobile devices that, they're just like an Android phone, but a little bit rugged. You don't want your iPhone in the warehouse. It's a lot of glass. It'll break. You give that tool to your people who are actually pulling orders and putting things on the shelf. They start using it on day one, but the total quantities could still be off because of, the garbage that you brought in to begin. So over time, we start doing those inventory audits and counts, but maybe product by product. You don't have to stop your whole business, shut it down for a week while you get everything in order before you start using warehouse management and an inventory software like Acctivate.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then, so let's talk about costing for a second. So we know QuickBooks native costing is this average costing. And what would people expect to see in terms of improved costing? Not just over average, but also as they start to be able to work things in like landed costing and so on, beyond what QuickBooks does.
Yeah, that's what we really focus on. And what we do is we actually break the cost down by lot. So as you are building and producing your inventory or processing, so we deal with a lot of like meat processors and even coffee companies. Coffee is a huge industry we deal with. So they buy the beans, they buy buy the fowls, the chicken themselves or whatever. And as they buy that product, it creates a lot number, right? Mm-hmm. And then as we add costs, so we have in America today, in Canada, everywhere, US and Canada both, we have a lot of tariffs, we have duties, we have insurance, we have all these fees.
Sure.
And most of the companies we talk to prior to using software like this, they're actually entering those fees as direct expenses. So on their P&L, you have your sales and your cost of goods sold, what you paid for the product, but then your additional fees are separate. So you can't see your true gross margins, your true profit for sales for products. But in Acctivate, we allocate that cost. So what you need to look for is a landed cost feature, right? So we take that cost, but we allocate it to the lots. So every lot will have a different cost over time. So instead of being all mixed in, average cost, which is what you see in QuickBooks, or even if you have software that says it's FIFO is still not exactly correct. It's better to be lot by lot, have that cost calculated.
Totally.
So the landed cost goes into the lot, and then also into manufacturing. Timing is a big problem with small businesses. You want to invoice your customers, you want to get the product out the door, and if you calculate that cost and that profit when you create the invoice, you may not even have all your expenses yet for the product that you've already sold. So what we find is a lot of these small businesses are just trying to get paid and trying to get the invoice out to the customer. So if you require them to have all the inventory and expenses and duties and taxes all allocated and in your accounting software before you invoice the customer, it's going to fall apart. So we allow that kind of a backdating concept, and it works really well.
Love that. It makes total sense. And, something that I've seen is people, with QuickBooks, they'll have some luck getting the landed costing in if all of those costs are in that one invoice, right? If your vendor of the materials is charging you for freight, then you can, with some massaging, get that to land with the inventory. But if you're getting a separate freight bill, from a different freight vendor, it's just not possible in QuickBooks at all. And so, and to the timing issue as well, one nightmare I've seen in QuickBooks is that the inventory receipt date and the invoice date from a vendor can't be different in QuickBooks Desktop. So it's like, here's the date the actual invoice came. Yeah. Now I've moved the date of receipt of the material, and then now I didn't have the asset at that time. So it's just, a total mess. So
that's a great story. Yeah. We see that a lot where, you want to receive the inventory. So we have customers, you want to receive it as soon as it's there. You don't want to wait until you get the bill.
Right.
Because a lot of distributors, especially if you're buying product from other small businesses who don't have their act together, you can't demand that. You don't really want the invoice either. You want to delay your expenses. So,
of course, yeah.
Right. So you want to sell it, get paid from your customer, and not wait until you pay your vendor before you can do that accurately. No, absolutely not. So,
and we see the same thing rolling out of production, right? We'll have a production order, and they've made the first 5 out of 26 pallets. The customer wants them. We're going to ship to them, right? But the order's not done. And so we don't have the labor in yet. Well, you're not going to wait till the order's done to ship it. You're going to ship it and then have the final cost flow through when it's done, right? And so, it's exactly as you said. There's a lot of nuance there. I wanted to also just touch on something which QuickBooks doesn't do, and some of the other softwares out there that both Acctivate and Mar-Kov compete with don't do, even if sometimes they advertise themselves as being built for manufacturing and serve process manufacturers, is they don't track actuals, right? So you're making bicycles, right? 2 wheels, right? Every time. You're never going to use 2.1 wheels, but when you're making food, when you're making cosmetics, dietary supplements, there's variance. You weigh out an actual amount, there's actuals on the batch, and if the system can't take those actuals used and make it in the product, the inventory is going to be wrong, the cost is going to be wrong, and you got a giant mess, right? So
that's right. Yeah, my experience, again, we've seen 15 or 20 different software products over the years, and most inventory software built for small business is really built for, I think you said bicycles, I think that's a great example. It's really designed for building discrete manufacturing, where you're building one item at a time. So your bill of materials are just quantities, and that's kind of what QuickBooks has, and some of the other products in the market. So we have that, and it's not just the outputs. We have the inputs as well. So the components. Here's your standard, and you'll actually put the the weight or the actual usage, and then we give the variance as well, so we can show you where whether you're doing better or worse, and then also on the finished good, you might pull enough components to build 40 boxes of chicken or whatever you're doing, and then you only come out with 38. Well, you want to know that, hey, we were the production run was for 40, and our yield was 38. And in QuickBooks and the other software, you just go in and you edit the 40 to be 38. There's no history. There's no way to see what happened there. And then when you change 38, guess what happens? All your components on that bill of materials assembly transaction are going to be updated for 38.
Right.
There's no way to keep them so you do 40 and then you do an inventory adjustment for 2, and it's just a mess.
Yeah, so, you rewrite the BOM. We got to rewrite the BOM for this one run.
You clone the BOM, and then what happens, and we see this a lot with small business companies, and those of you watching, you've probably done this. You end up with a lot of copies of a product. So you'll have 50 different versions of the same product for every discrete quantity that you've ever, for every unit quantity you've ever had, and that's just a disaster. So
one of the big benefits we've seen too is now the production manager can go in at the end of the month, and it's like, second shift is always underproducing. Like, it's the shift that Peter's running has a problem. whereas Brian now has that much more output and higher yield. And like, what can Brian teach Peter now? Now we can start figuring out, do I have a packaging line problem? Do I have a supervisor problem? It's something you don't have access to in QuickBooks.
Well, between Peter and Brian, it's probably a supervisor problem. It's probably you, but yeah, I don't know, man. Crack the whip.
Yeah.
Now, something in an area that Peter and I have less experience with is around fulfillment, right? So, we usually work with the contract manufacturers and less with this, pick and pack, kind of, D2C type deal. What can you say about, when is a company outgrown like paper pick lists or whatever and needing a system to help them? And what can a system do to make that go smoother?
Yeah. So, I see there are a couple different scenarios that we run into where the accuracy is really important. So number one, when you get that deal, and if you have a customer that comes to you, like we have companies that satisfy orders from Costco and Kroger and grocery stores, and the accuracy of the packaging, the labeling requirements, all of that is really important when you get that big deal. So if you've got, you start talking to a buyer at Walmart, you get excited, you fly, have your webinar, your calls with the buyer, and you get the order, and it's great. They like your product, but are you really prepared to satisfy their requirements? And they don't talk about that a lot, but there are a lot of strict requirements. And you can actually get penalized. If you don't label your products right, there's a dirty word in fulfillment called chargebacks. So if you don't have those labels correct and you don't have the proper, barcodes on everything, then you're going to actually have fines that can just completely obliterate your profits. So the main thing is volume. I think our companies that have very small local sales, so they have customers that come and pick things up at their location, and they're not really delivering, or they're not using LTL carriers, like they don't have a truck coming up on their dock, then maybe you can get away with paper tickets. But as soon as you start to get that volume, you really need to look at having a system that can actually barcode. And even if you don't have barcodes, but you can actually pick and pack the items electronically and have that in a database that we can use to communicate with the customer.
Yeah, and I'm interested in, so something that actually we do have some experiences with that, filling through a distributor or filling, larger loads for a Walmart to stores, but where we sometimes, have less certainty is these smaller like onesies and twosies. Like I have 2,000 orders today that are going to go direct to, end users. Is that something you guys address with Acctivate?
Yeah, for sure. So the scheduling of orders and the scheduling of items to be picked. If you're just using a basic software like QuickBooks or paper-based, you're going to have all the stacks of paper. You're going to print out those order forms, but not having that audit, the list. We call it a pick list. And our pick list will tell the pickers and tell the guys in the warehouse exactly what to pick across all orders. So the small business way without software like us is that you're going to go pick one order at a time. So you're going to make a trip through the warehouse really for every single order, but we're going to give you a pick list, which will show you everything that needs to be pulled for today's orders. And then you can go to the warehouse, pull those, then move it to staging and actually do the boxing there.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it's just cutting down on the time it takes to process one order at a time, which is the traditional way of processing picking, and then move to batch processing, which is pick list. And then also with software like QuickBooks or paper-based, you're probably creating invoices one at a time. So you pick the order, you pack it, and then you need to remember to make sure immediately you bill the customer. Because a lot of our companies don't prepay, so their customers are not paying for the order up front, and then they're delivering after the fact. The terms and their agreements with their customers is that they don't actually send the invoice until the order is being prepared for shipment. So getting that communicating that back from the warehouse is a mess with just paper pick tickets.
This is such an easy time study an owner can do, just walking back into the facility and say, okay, how long does it take you to go out and grab? And if we're doing 50 orders a day, what does that look like? If we're doing 200, if we're doing 5 a day, when is that really starting to hurt? That's such an easy, like 30-minute exercise to go out and take a look at just to get a sense of how much money you might be able to save. That's good.
I love what you said about the timing of the invoicing as well. We've seen that too, like you said, where you might make an aggregate invoice. If a particular customer wants to say invoice us at the end of the month, for example. But we also have this interesting case we see with contract manufacturers. This comes up sometimes where they might have a brand that is a smaller brand and wants us to make the product, but hold it on their behalf until they're ready for it to be released, and then maybe drop ship it on their behalf. And now we have something that we call bill and hold, where we invoice the customer the product, but we keep it in our warehouse. So you have to invoice it, recognize that it's no longer ours, and then still keep it in the warehouse system. And so that's a layer of complexity as well that we see. And it's just another example. If you're purpose built for contract manufacturing, then you're going to have something like that. But you just got no chance with something like QuickBooks to solve that.
If you were using QuickBooks for that, as soon as you create the invoice, you're back to negative inventory.
yeah, exactly.
Right. It's like, how many do we have in stock? Negative 50. I don't know what that means. So people just stop looking at there's no inventory numbers at all in the system. So
we need the spreadsheet. They gotta be in and the desktop has to be on. We gotta check the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Walmart. I'm glad you did that. It's a great segue to EDI, right? So I guess the $1 million question for me with EDI is, when is it worth it, right? You can always use this web platform, that Walmart or the other big retailers will provide you. When is it worth it to jump from that and then directly integrate EDI into your systems?
Yeah, this is definitely a question that a lot of our customers deal with. And so when I first joined the company, this is 24 years ago, so I'm older than I look, I think. But one of the first companies I worked with had that exact situation. So they, again, got the deal. They were actually a Walmart distributor. This is not a food company. So they were selling the little rubber mouth guards that you use for football and American football, right? So they they got the orders, and so what would happen is Walmart would place the purchase order, and they had to package for store because they're small items, right? And so they would ship to DCs, distribution centers, and then they would actually have the orders all marked for store. But when they got the order, this is about when it's time to go with EDI software. Why they approached us is every time the order came in, they would have 3,000 stores, 2,000 stores. They literally sold to every store. And so when the orders came in, they would have contract employees who would come in, and what we used to call rip and read, and usually it's just use the portal. They would log into the Walmart website, and they would have to rekey the orders and their accounting software in QuickBooks, because they had to Walmart didn't provide you with a tool to just turn it around and invoice it. You actually still had to record it for your own accounting. And so they had all these employees that would just come in. It was like 2 or 3 people would rotate. And when that order would come in, they would work overnight. So they would come in at 6 p.m. and try to get everything ready, because they had to start packaging the orders at 6 a.m. the next morning when their warehouse staff shows up. So if you find yourself being overwhelmed with having to what we call rip and read and re-enter those orders in your software, that's when it's time for EDI. I mean,
right.
And you have to have accuracy. Again, if you ship the wrong order, if you mark it for store 1256 and you ship it to the wrong DC, you're not going to get that inventory back or that value. They're not going to just reship it for you.
Right.
It's a mess. So I think really is when you start selling to big box retail and grocery stores like Costco, Target, Kroger, you need to be ready to go to EDI as soon as you ship, either nationally or regionally. If you've got a special at Costco where you're selling, some specialty steaks or something, and you're just going to sell it at a few locations, you don't need EDI. You can just read it off the website and re-enter it. But as soon as you have national distribution or even regional, and you're getting dozens of orders or hundreds of orders a month, then you probably should consider an EDI integrated solution.
So to recap, it's the time savings of entering it, right? Hundreds, thousands of orders, and it's also like the cost of mistakes, right? So a big retailer is going to punish you if for those little mistakes in order entry.
It's such a easy. This is like such an easy check for, again, an owner or someone else to do. How many orders do we get? How long does it take? How many errors have we made? And we're planning to go from 20 orders to 100 orders a month. At some point at 35, it starts to make sense. It's like an email to double check this.
There's also this interesting, to change the topic slightly for a second, and I think, Brian, we've had some similar experiences. When our customers are ready to have direct EDI connection with their customers, they'll sometimes say, okay, well, we'll need you to connect to SPS, which of course SPS is a market leader in EDI. And one story that I think it would be interesting to tell is there's this whole who's on first kind of situation that happens here, because what happens is the retailers use SPS as their EDI platform. And then SPS says, oh, well, we need to get your vendors on SPS so that we can efficiently communicate. And then they use that as an avenue to sell SPS as the EDI provider to those vendors. But it's being provided to them as like a web interface tool, right? Not directly into the accounting. So then what happens is we come along and it's like, okay, time to connect to SPS. And they introduce us to their SPS contact, but it's their SPS account manager that they use for their account, not the customer's account manager. Sorry, not the retailer's account manager. And we're like, no. We need to talk to the SPS person with Walmart, not your SPS person. Your guy's the one we're going to cut out of the loop, and you're not going to have to pay them anymore. And of course, now we're playing who's on first, except that SPS is actually not actively trying to make this less confusing, right? They benefit from that confusion. So it's
So our experience, and we've worked with SPS Commerce for like 15 years, maybe even longer.
Yeah.
But starting with like plain text FTP and kind of moving from there. So transferring files back and forth, right? Cool. So, the SPS model is to bring you on as a full service. So if you are a vendor to an SPS trading partner, such as Target or one of these large grocery companies, you either have to pay the service to use their software. And again, if you have the volume, it's probably worth it to sign up. But if you don't, if you do find, like, let's say your IT guy says, I can make it work, I can do the integration, then you have to go through and you have to pay and you have to deal with their certification. So if you use their service and you find software that integrates with SPS Commerce, like we do, then you don't have to worry about that certification. We've already been certified. So it's just turnkey. There is some timeline. They have to set up a new trading partner connection. You have to get an account. You have to pay for it. But if you don't do that, you still have to work with SPS.
Yeah.
But you just have to have your custom solution has to be certified and integrated. And the cost of that really can be as much as the software cost for buying a system like ours. So it's really shocking with how small businesses are just not prepared to sell to these large big box retailers and grocery stores. They just don't expect that. And if your buyer tells you that it's just like email, well, it is, except it's very strict and there can be consequences if you type anything wrong, So
something else, unlike Mar-Kov, I think Acctivate, you guys work a lot with brands, right? So that side of the fence where brands, a lot of the same challenges around tracking inventory, but they're not holding it there physically, right? They're holding it at remote locations. I think it would be useful, our audience are primarily these manufacturers, but maybe we could get a peek at the other side of the street. What's the view from the brand perspective, deploying a system and then looking across at how do I interact with my contract manufacturer?
Yeah. That is, we actually have probably had more brand companies than we have the actual contract manufacturer. So again, that's why I'm so excited to meet you guys and join team because I feel like we serve both sides of the supply chain. But our companies are definitely the brands that you've seen in the stores. So if you walk through these cosmetics, if you're at Ulta or you're at Target and Kroger, our brands are the companies that you see on the shelf. And the number one thing that they need from the contract manufacturers is, being able to satisfy the needs of their customers, the customer service needs. So communicating and exchanging data for lot numbers and, the dates required. So the best buy dates, the manufacturer date, the lot number, the quality, everything that we need. We like to work directly with the contract manufacturers and set up a relationship for data exchange. So some of our companies, especially the larger companies, will use EDI, not just for the trading partners to the retail stores and the grocery stores, but they will also use EDI to their manufacturer partners and the 3PL, the third-party logistics warehouse companies. So if you think of these brands, they're just a hub. They're a marketing company in most cases, right? So they've built the product, they market the product. We've talked before. A lot of our customers are in Manhattan. It's like, where's your warehouse? You're on Madison Avenue. It's like, where's your inventory? Well, it's not there. It's at a big logistics warehouse or multiple warehouses across the country.
Sure.
So again, that customer service and being ready to communicate where your products are, what's coming out, what's being shipped in real time, really, to your brand is very important. And if you don't satisfy that need, they'll look for somebody else. So it's not just being a low-cost manufacturer. It's also giving that customer service and visibility. So if you have, maybe software like Mar-Kov or whatever else you're doing, exchanging the tracking numbers and the shipments, knowing where things are, when it's going to arrive. All of that data is what our customers demand from their manufacturers. And these are, we've got companies that stayed on QuickBooks into the $100 million revenue range, which is shocking.
Yeah.
But, if you sell, 20, 30 products at every grocery store, you can get away with that. So
Totally.
And, something that we've often seen, almost every time I do a site visit with a customer and we get to join the production planning meetings and their scheduling calls, something I see time and time again is they'll be looking at the production schedule. Like, what are we going to make this week? What are we moving around? And like, oh, well, we're going to have to bump that order because the brand didn't get us their branded labels or branded packaging components on time. And so we'll bump the order. And meanwhile, the brand's pressuring the manufacturer to get things done on time and to move fast, and then drops the ball on communicating around when those brand supplied components will arrive, and oftentimes doesn't give information at all. Right, like the contract manufacturer has a Mar-Kov that does all their production planning for them around inventory. Right, like, what raw materials do I need? What packaging components do I need? When will I run production? Will I have enough on time? Will it meet the demands of when the customer needs it? Okay, everything's locked and ready, and I've got this beautiful schedule, except one missing piece of information is, when will I get that branded bottle or label? And they just can't get that information out of the brand. And like, okay, well, we'll have to hope for the best and schedule production, and then it doesn't show up. So I guess public service announcement to brands is like, you need a system to at least participate in that part of the planning to make things easier for the contract manufacturer and like the communication to do so, right? It's in your self-interest to say, here is when the components are coming, and and this quantity will come, and we will make sure they are there at that time, right?
Yeah, it's a great story because it absolutely goes two ways, right? So
Yeah.
I think but the thing to keep in mind is the brand also doesn't have a warehouse full of jars and labels and packaging. So
Right.
that's another. So they're
Good point.
We always present our software as a hub for managing all of this for a brand, right? So knowing that the manufacturer needs the packaging materials on schedule, on time, it goes both ways. That they need to be able to communicate that to you and to that other partner, that other vendor. When those supplies arrive, you'll notice that they didn't ship from Madison Avenue in New York. They're coming from another manufacturer, and they're upset that they weren't communicated your production schedule.
Right.
So
right.
like I said, I think one of the most important things in this space of co-packers and co-manufacturing is communication and being open and working with them, and not just doing the electronic data exchange like EDI and emailing Excel files, but actually having a good platform in place to track and communicate.
Beautiful.
Do you have other questions to ask before we get to implementation?
Let's do it.
Okay. Advice for companies. I'm sure there's companies out here listening. We need a system. Inventory is negative in QuickBooks. We can't trust it. We're wasting time in the warehouse. We're manually making invoices, ready to do it. What advice do you have for companies that are going to implement software? What can they do to make it run smoother?
Yeah. So I have the strong opinion and belief that the first thing that generally fails, so ERP implementations have a really high failure rate, right?
Sure.
And one of the biggest reasons is that they generally replace the whole system. So companies that are using QuickBooks, which absolutely, and I think we can all agree that QuickBooks really is the best-in-class leader for small business accounting. So it does a great job connecting to your bank, doing your payroll, super easy to use. You can run it on your iPhone.
Sure.
QuickBooks is good for accounting. So number one is try not to throw out everything and change everything at once. So that's why I think that's why we all exist, is that it's nice to find an integrated solution. Find something where you're not having to replace your general ledger and your payroll and your accounts receivable and your accounts payable, your inventory system and your production system all on a Tuesday. That's going to fail. Yeah. So I think the phased approach is good. We will generally find companies that you start using Acctivate, and our recommendation for implementation is get the core inventory, sales orders, purchase orders, manufacturing pieces in place. And then a lot of times we will still do paper tickets. So for the first 6 months, you may want to still continue to print a pick slip, pick ticket. So you may want to still print a pick ticket for the warehouse that's on paper, and then not do the mobile devices on day one, because maybe you're not really ready for that. So again, we like that phased approach, number one. The other thing that I would be wary of, we sometimes will find consultants or even other software companies that will plan a one-day trip, or they'll come on site for 2 days. And you're not going to be able to really rip the Band-Aid off and go live with a software in 2 days. It just doesn't work. So I think we take a 60 to 90-day approach. So we do the introduction calls, and we make a copy of their data. We take a QuickBooks file, if it's desktop, make a copy. If it's online, we connect with a copy of it, and let them play around. So get a sandbox, see if you can get a copy of the software. Usually you do need to buy the software first. 20 years ago, everybody wanted a free trial, which is kind of a slap in the face to training. And I'm not on the training team here, but there's a reason why you have implementation and training services, because how are you going to learn to use this new software just by jumping into it? It doesn't work. So you will need time. You're going to need time to set that up. We generally spend about 60 days with small businesses to get a copy of the data, to do a mock connection to QuickBooks, and we call it a model company. So we model their data. We make sure that things look good. We get the reports ready. Any invoice formats, put their logo on it, do all that basic stuff, and then try to go live in 60 days. And then after they go live, that first 30 days, so if you're watching this as a customer, that's the most intense time. It's not when you first buy the software and you get trained, but it's the day that you start processing your first orders in the software, and just be prepared for that. But you need a team on call. Being there in the warehouse is probably not necessary for that. We do almost everything remote now, and it works really well. After we've learned about the company, we don't need to be there every day, right? And being on call, I think, for that 3-month period is what you should expect.
No, that makes total sense.
You had another way to ask this question. What should they do ahead of time? They say, okay, we want to do this. It's like day 0 and the project's kicking off. What are the things they have assembled to make the project go really smooth? Just
knowledge, right? So bringing the people that know about the business. So I think getting the right people involved in a project is the most important, indicator of success. So I know the owner is busy. It's holiday. He's got kids in college, or there's some excuse why he can't take those calls. I think that's a big mistake. So
Yeah.
you need to have a discussion. The owner of the company, the operations manager, the general manager, whoever's in charge, doesn't need to be in the nitty gritty. They don't need to set up parts and part categories and things like that, but they need to make sure the direction of the business is clearly communicated to the software implementer. So who's setting this up? What's important? We have companies. Not every company needs to track every single feature that we have in the software. We have food companies that are not tracking the best by dates and expiration dates, which is shocking, but they're like, that's not a problem for us.
Yeah.
Our contract manufacturer takes care of that. We have it all in file, not a big deal. But I would have approached it like, you need this, you need that. And until you have those conversations, in small business, it's just, there's a spectrum of needs. And so starting with the top, I think, is the most important. So if you're the owner, you need to be involved in those early calls.
You're saying you don't want the owner's nephew who's really good at computers, who's going to be the summer student?
The number of times we've seen that, Peter, where they we don't need a computer expert. We need somebody who's an expert in your business.
That's right.
Like you said, the owner or maybe a plant manager or purchasing manager it's just, it drives me crazy.
But then the second part, and we talked about this earlier, the second part is, do not wait until you have a perfect inventory count. Don't wait until it's a slow time of year, because it's never going to happen. We're always busy. We're always slammed. There's never a good time. So rip the Band-Aid off, get the software in place, and just start. Just start setting orders in the system and start working with it, because we have companies that have delayed because they're trying to get that product list perfect. And you're buying the software, you're setting up the system to help you manage those products and that inventory.
Exactly.
There's no, if your inventory was perfect, why are you even talking to us? Right?
Exactly. Yeah. You want to build that momentum, right? Get it in so that it can start helping you. You can taste some of the benefit, and then that gets you some momentum to carry the rest of the way.
Yeah. And if you're using QuickBooks, if you've tried to clean up QuickBooks after you've had all these messes, I mean, that's a huge project in itself. So I just say, throw it away, just get the data into our software and get rid of everything that was in QuickBooks. We'll mark that inventory as inactive. We'll zero it all out, and we'll just start using our software going forward.
Start anew.
And then 6 months from now, by year end, you'll have forgotten how messy it was before.
I love it. I feel like I'm looking in the mirror. I've said the exact same thing. Yeah, so good.
I feel like this should be common knowledge. It's not that difficult, right? You just need to start. There's a lot of inspirational videos out there, right? Just start today.
Start today.
Yeah.
It's never a good time to get a puppy. So let's all just get puppies right now, I think is
so I'm in Texas, where we have a lot of heat, right? And there's this Chinese proverb, right? That's like the best, when's the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. And the second best, right?
We need some trees right now.
Yeah, the second best time is today, now. So
love it. Cool. Well, Brian, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on, and really appreciate the time.
Yes.
Yeah, I really appreciate joining you guys, and really look forward to this relationship.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks for watching the Better Batch podcast. We're so happy you could join us. If you've got an idea for show ideas, or you just want to improve your manufacturing, reach out to us, and we'd love to hear from you.